間が5よ。
お、一時じゃ多い。
Hello and welcome to After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's live boxing show, coming to you just minutes after the final bell tonight, where Josh Kelly was stopped in the 6th round by David Avanesyan. Obviously, we'll have a full rundown of that fight and the rest of the fights on the undercard. My name is Martin Domin, editor of Mirror Fighting, joined once again by Swindon's favourite boxing son, Declan Taylor.
Hold on. What about Jamie Cox?
I knew you were going to say that. I thought I'll go with second, but listen, why not start at the top? And for the first time, by former super featherweight world champion, now one of boxing's most respected pundits, Barry Jones. Great to have you both tonight. Not too bad a time. It has been worse. I thought we might be, into Sunday morning, but thank you to David Avanesyan, who has ensured we start at a reasonable time. As well as being live, we are indeed interactive, so please do give us your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to ask the panel. We'll also be as a podcast on Sunday morning, so you can also listen to us, but surely seeing our faces is the best way. So let's just have a run through of the results. As I said, Josh Kelly started reasonably well, but by the 6th round, quite exhausted. Towel came in, game over. Florian Marcus stopped Ryland Charlton in the 8th round. Robbie Davies Jr. was beaten by Gabriel Valenzuela, and there were victories for Jordan Gill and for Johnny Fisher on his heavyweight debut. Let's start though with the main event. We've waited 2 and a bit years for it. Didn't disappoint, but it was a reasonable start from Josh Kelly. Boxed well, got a sort of strange cut on the back of his head, but then really once David Avanesyan sort of started bringing the fight to Josh Kelly, making it uncomfortable for him, he didn't seem to have any answers.
No, I think he started. We sort of knew what the pattern was going to be in the fight. It was going to be Avanesyan who was going to be the one pushing the pace, and Kelly was going to be the guy, manoeuvring around the outside and peppering him with jabs and combinations and that fancy footwork that we've seen so much of him. And I think it was sort of working for the both of them in many ways. I think Kelly's jab was brilliant, those some jumping in the right hands. That lean back left hook was working really well for him in the early rounds, and Avanesyan was making him work hard, which I sure was their plan for the offset. When you're up against a guy who's naturally more skillful or has faster hands and feet, which obviously Kelly does, then you don't want to give those rounds away, but you sort of know that you might be in a deficit by the halfway stage. So you make that guy work as hard as you possibly do, as he can, which he did. And then he started to close the gap. And there was the worry for me with Kelly is he has low hands, and you have low hands because you want better movement. So when your hands are high, you're more rigid. When they're a little bit lower, your shoulders are relaxed and you can get that lateral movement and you can sway side to side. And also your jab's hard to read when it comes up from a different angle. But with that, your chin's exposed. And I think from early doors, it was evident that Avanesyan could hit him with the right hand too easily. Though not clean and full enough. But obviously that was the shot that finished the fight by the end of it. And I think that was a worry because the more tired you become, the more easy you are to hit, and that was the worry. And as we spoke before we started, and you already alluded to, how quick that tank drains of Josh Kelly. And I think that's don't want to take anything away from Avanesyan because I think he boxed a great fight, but that's a big factor. That tank just empties, like literally within sort of 30 seconds. You can see the energy drain from him, and then without that movement and with the hands low, you're in trouble.
I think, Dick, you predicted beforehand Kelly on points, but did the fight play out as you might have expected that Kelly would, if we elongate that fight, let's say, to over 12 rounds, is that how you thought it would go? That Kelly would start better, maybe build a lead, and then have to fight off Avanesyan towards the end?
To be honest, I was surprised at how quickly he started. I was impressed, but after 3 or 4 rounds, you thought there's no way that both of these can keep up this pace, particularly not Kelly. And you noticed, I think it was in the 4th or the 5th, Kelly did something, had a little burst, and then you heard Carl Greaves say, don't let him have a breather, because they obviously anticipated that he would go pop, 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 look good, have a little walk, refill his lungs, and they knew that was the opportunity to jump on him. I thought he'd start a lot slower, and it would be, like I put on Twitter, it would be one of those Adam Booth similar to when you think of what Adam Booth did with David Hay and Nikolai Valuev, George and James DeGale, where it was like, we've got a game plan, we're going to stick within an inch of what we're going to do, and this is a strong, powerful, relentless guy. We're going to try and nick the rounds, keep something in the tank. That's what I thought they were going to do. And then he came out firing. He looked great, but it was just one of them where you thought, there's no way he can maintain this, particularly when he starts getting clipped, and then when Avanesyan starts working the body. I mean, it's a great performance from Avanesyan. It's one of them. Carl Greaves, we spoke to Carl Greaves last week on Zoom from the hotel, and he basically predicted exactly to the letter what we've just seen. So they knew what they were doing, and they read it perfectly. And Avanesyan boxed to orders, and it's a great win for him, and it's a real bad night for Josh Kelly.
I would say the thing about the game plans, you need a game plan, but it has to be so elastic, because the other guy can do something totally different, or to react to that. Boxing is the most reactive sport you can get. So having a rigid game plan can work against you, because then you run out of ideas. If you're drilling in, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do. You sort of have to do that, but this would be so lucid, because otherwise, if it's too rigid and that doesn't work, or he counteracts that, then you have to think on your feet. But you've been drilled in for 12 weeks. This is what you have to do to win the fight. And so all game plans are great, and you need them. But all this, that game plan, I had the perfect game plan. There's no such thing. Because if the guy reacts a different way, which can happen, and it's not tried and tested until fight nights, of course. It's all theoretical until you get in the ring with that opponent. So you can't have 10 game plans, but they have to be very elastic and loose. Otherwise, you run out of ideas, and once that doesn't work, you especially for a young fight, you have nowhere to go. And I think that's not quite what happened there. But and as Carl Greaves got it spot on, I think it was quite not obvious, but
it was clear what they had to do
to predict what each one would sort of win. It would be the pressure or the movement would prevail, and it obviously was the pressure.
So on game plans, then let me bring in this question: and let's not, we're not going to throw too much blame around, but was Adam Booth to blame for the tactics? It looked as if Kelly thought he was just going to walk his man down.
Well, this is a funny one, because he says then the breathing was heavy. That's what I mean, is that surely they didn't, Adam and Josh Kelly didn't expect them to be able to maintain a pace like that for that. Maybe they did, maybe they prepared for that, but everyone could see that he was clearly draining. The more he was getting clipped, the more it was going down. That's what I mean. I thought that they might try and, when you've got a bull of a man like Avanesyan, you would think, keep something in the tank, nick a couple of early rounds, get ahead, and then use your talent and your skill to get past. That's what I mean. And I'm not sure who's to blame for that, because it wasn't like he was getting told off in the corner. It's a really good question.
I think your style is your style. So you can only tailor to what you're good at. So what he's good at is movement, and of course sharp counters. So, but the jab was working. I think that the only thing with the jab was meant to deter Avanesyan from walking forward, and it didn't. And I think they probably banked on that, because that jab of Kelly's was a lovely shot. I wrote in my book, the jab's really sharp, and he was stepping in with it, so it was working, or it should have been working. He was doing everything right, but it wasn't having the effect that they thought it would have, and I think that was the problem. So again, you can't blame Booth, because if Kelly would have won, he gets all the praise and Booth gets a bit of it. I think you get trainers get too much criticism and too much praise as well. I think nowadays, you're only as good as your fighter. You can only enhance your fighter or mess it up for him. But a good cornerman's worth his weight in gold. But if the fighter can't do it, he just can't do it.
2 fights stopped by the towel coming in tonight. Of course, there's been plenty of discussion, debate in previous weeks about towels not coming in. It looked as if Kelly was obviously in trouble, Dick, but towel, correct decision. Did it surprise you at all? Did you think he'd be given a bit more time?
Yeah, when I first saw it, and obviously the camera angle meant that you could see Adam sort of going for it early, I thought, wow, that's quick. Why not let him take a knee? But actually looking at back on slow-mo, you think he knows him far better than us, and he knows what's happened, like what Kelly's got left in the tank and how much these shots are taken out of him. So I can't argue with that one. And the Marku one was absolutely perfectly timed. To be honest, at first I thought, oh, that's quick. Surely let him take a knee. It's not like he was badly. It didn't look like he was really, really hurt, but actually was all over the place. So yeah, I would say both of them were bang on. And it's always kind of nice to see, isn't it? Well, maybe look at the other way. It's really difficult to watch when you're thinking, how is his trainer not pulling him out here? So it's good. It's good when you see that compassion from the corner.
I mean, we've waited 2 years, 2 months for this fight. It's a long time, Barry, to sort of be almost training for one man to get as close as they did. They'd weighed in. I mean, that doesn't happen very often at all. It's a long time to train for one man, and then to lose it, especially in that manner, psychologically, it's going to be difficult for Josh Kelly, I would imagine.
It is, because I think Josh Kelly's he's built on confidence. So the more wins, the more confident you become, the more border on arrogance, if you like, and he's the one being put up as the star, and he's one having to sell the show. And again, the longer you wait, the more anticipation and the bigger build-up, which obviously means there's a bigger fall. And I think it will be a while before he comes to terms with it. I think Avanesyan would have dealt better with it, to be fair, because he's been beat before, and also all the pressure wasn't on him, even though he felt like he was the more experienced. So it'll take a while for Kelly, but he is young, and he is relatively inexperienced. Well, he is inexperienced. That was his 12th fight, maybe. So he's got a lot, in this era now, in this generation, we sort of throw fighters in the bin once they get beat or they get exposed. Just because you got exposed for whatever reason, which we didn't really get exposed, just slightly, doesn't mean you're not a good fighter. It means that if you can learn from that and adapt your game to fill the holes in that were missing, what you need. And for me, I think it's a real core stamina issue, maybe. Then he'll come back a better fighter for it. And we look through history, and we've seen fighters who've come back from worse defeats than that, against worse opposition than that, and gone on to be fantastic fighters. So you got plenty of time. It's hard in the harsh reality of being live on TV and topping a bill, and everyone expecting you to prevail in superstardom style. When that comes crashing down, then it's in the public eye. It's a difficult thing to. I'm talking like out of experience. I didn't experience that, but it's going to be hard for him. But he'll adjust, and he'll come back a better fighter for it, or he won't. But I think he will.
Declan, still plenty of promise there.
Yeah. I mean, this was always the problem with this fight, isn't it? Is that it was a massive step up, and that was why. Well, it has been suggested that was why the fight got pulled in the first place. Also, we forget that obviously it's been 27 months or whatever since it was supposed to happen, but actually a whole year of that has been pandemic. So it's not like he's been out building and getting better from then. Really, they've both sort of they had 3 fights each, and then they've both had a year off. So it's not as if he's any closer to being the finished article than he was back then. I still like I said before on the show, that I'd like him against Conor Benn. I mean, Conor Benn's he's relentless, isn't he? And he's clearly super, super fit. So you've got those two styles there. I still think, there's still loads of talent there and loads of promise. And it was just, we always knew that style-wise, this looked like a nightmare for him. And it was like, if he can get past that, and if he can prove that it's not a nightmare for him, then it's a colossal win. But it just was too much for him.
We've talked a fair bit about stamina. Is there a part of it where your stamina is worse if you just don't fancy it? And I'm not saying Josh Kelly didn't fancy it, but if you know you're struggling and your stamina's not there, and you also don't fancy it, then the two kind of a bad combination.
I don't think you can question his heart. I guess you're not saying that, but that's what it sort of might seem like. But I say about, I don't think fighters run long like they used to, because I don't think it's good for your joints and your body. I think all the modern trainers or health experts will probably tell you that. But what was important about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and running? Most of us had jobs, but I mean, what was most important about it is you don't want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go for a run. You don't want to run in general. You surely don't want to do it at 5 o'clock when it's dark and raining and cold and everyone else is in bed, and you got to, if you're lucky, you got a beautiful partner next to you and they're in bed and you've got to get up and run. Who wants to do that? But that's a mental thing, because when you're in round 7 and you're blowing out your backside, and even if you're winning a fight, and I've been winning a fight and I've wanted to quit because I've been so tired, but it's something in you. You fire back, but drawing from your experiences. And if you haven't had experiences of attrition in the ring, those hard runs in the morning force yourself to get up and do things you don't want to do. That's what I'm trying to say. You have to do things you don't want to do to get over, to be mentally strong. That when you get in that sort of scenario where everything's against you, you need to draw some strength from an experience. That's the experience, unless you've had it already in the ring. Not everyone needs that. Some people are just born, with that innate toughness. Others are not. And I don't know whether I was, but I had to run, so I didn't have to find out. Because the last place you want to find out if you have it in there or in your belly or whatever is round 7 of a title fight, or round 8 or whatever it is, round 6. So, I'm not saying that applies to Josh Kelly, but possibly, and I think I think these modern training techniques are fantastic for boxers, and everyone looks fantastic and they look great. And I'm sure it helps their longevity and their obviously their life when they retire. But you have to be pushed beyond your boundaries quite often in this sport, because actually, when you're actually doing it for real, you're almost every time pushed beyond the boundaries that you should want to go to achieve success. And it's that sort of sport, I'm afraid. Whether you like it or not, that's what it is.
Should Josh now look to move up in weight? I mean, there was some discussion beforehand that he maybe was too big at welterweight. I mean, it's always kind of the questions, isn't it? Should he move up to weight? Should he change this, change that? But the question will be asked.
He looked massive. That's no bad thing, but like the first couple of rounds, I thought he looks colossal here, and this is going to be great for him. But maybe it's not. It's hard to say, isn't it? He looked amazing in the pictures. He obviously made weight. It's a tough one because it's a good division to be in, isn't it? And if you can do it properly, then he should stay there. What I would say is that he's had a long enough at it. He moved into his flat round the corner from the gym in September. So, it's been a long camp. If he couldn't do it for this one, then like appropriately and feel $1 million, going into the ring, then it ain't going to happen for him going forward. He's not going to have a run like this. So I would say, I don't know. I think I still like him as a welterweight. I don't see it as being a problem if you have to really boil down to make it, if you're strong at the weight. And he did look strong, but it's what Barry said there. It's about really the stamina, and is that down to being in a weight class too low? I'm not sure. It maybe not. It might not be. It's not necessarily about how much weight you had to take off. Could be something else. But if he can do it, then that's the division for him, because he hasn't even got to leave Britain, and he's going to make mega money over the next 3 or 4 years. So, I don't know. It's always the first thing to look at, isn't it? When someone loses, you always go, "Oh, he'd probably go up one," like with Callum Smith and everything else. But I don't think that's the situation here. I think he looked good. He looked amazing in build-up. He looked great on the scales, all things considered. Yeah, I'd still say if he can do welterweight, he should be there.
I think his problem will be as well that I think he's stuck there because he's a big welterweight. If he moves it to light middleweight, he's not so big.
Yeah.
And also with that shoulder roll style, that low left hand, light middleweights now are all of a sudden 5'11", 6 foot, and that low left hand is perfect for the fighter. You see, Mayweather never really boxed a lot of guys who were taller than him because that shoulder turn, you can get the right hand over the top. But if you're shorter, that right hand's got to go up here. So you stick the elbow out, and he would stop you from throwing that. You go up the line, and he would stop that. So Kelly tries to do that, and it works quite often. But the taller guy will just come over your shoulder, and that's the problem you'll have. I'm not saying he can't be successful at that weight, but it makes it a bit more difficult. So I think if he might just be one of those guys who's going to be a big welter, is always going to struggle to make the weight. But it's better than the alternative of boxing bigger, taller guys who means you'll have to adapt his style again slightly. But listen, he's a young kid.
I must say as well, I spoke to him last week and on the Wednesday or something like that. And, often by that point in a fight week, boxers are very snippy. They don't want to talk. They're rubbish and they look awful. And they're looking for a way out and they're giving you one-word answers. That wasn't him at all. He looked very healthy, fresh. He was lucid. He was chatting. He was relaxed. So I don't think it's one of them where the whole of the last week he was killing himself just to try and battle to make that weight. It didn't feel like that. I didn't sense that. I think, like Barry said, there's something else with the fitness. I don't think it's the cut.
A couple more questions here. We touched on the towel, but the cut was really strange. I mean, I'm assuming it was a clash of heads, but it wasn't a cut that obviously stopped him seeing or anything, but it was a lot of blood. does losing that much blood affect a fighter?
I don't think the loss of blood, but you can panic when you get cut. And it was a clash of heads. I think Avanesyan came in, and caught him, but unintentionally. But that's what happened. You can panic because you don't know if it's cut. All you feel is a pump. So that's the same feeling as when you get a welt, a swelling. So you're not sure what it is. So it can make you uncomfortable because you start to think, I need to protect that. Plus, he got a cut in the back of his head, which again, he's not worried about that, too much the pain wise, but you do panic about, was that going to be an issue? So it just takes your thought process. It can change your thought process slightly and take you offline of your plan or your idea of what you want to do. So it can affect you a little bit. Not every fighter, you have to learn to adapt. And obviously, again, the more experience you have, the easier it becomes when those things happen. But it can affect other fighters certain fighters more than others. And I don't think that was a massive factor of the fight, but it might have affected him. I think ultimately the factor of the fight is Tank just went right down because Avanesyan was putting so much pressure on him. That was it. That was all it was. And you have to give his opponent all the credit for that. He did his job. Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, better than Kelly did his.
Mm. If Kelly hadn't got cut on the back of the head or the eye, I still think that we would have had that same finish. So if you look at the pattern of the fight, you would probably say, yeah, maybe they did seem to go in, they were at the same sort of time as the cuts came and he faded. But I would say even if he wasn't cut at all, that was coming.
I would say, though, panic. When you panic, and people, Golovkin does it with the feet, they make you panic. When you panic, it really messes up your breathing. You're breathing because of erratic, because it's all, and that can help with the loss of energy. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that can help. So all these things have a factor. But I agree with Declan. Ultimately, I think the fight was going to go the way it went, regardless of the blood.
Second weekend in a row, of course, Eddie Hearn's house fighter stopped. A shocking few weeks, one may say. Is it a concern that his talent pool is struggling to deliver?
Well, first thing I'll say on that before we get onto that, the talent pool, is that Carl Grease told us last week that Avanesyan's actually a matchroom fighter now. They signed him up, so sweet, happy
Smart
days.
move.
He's got options on locker as well, so I wouldn't cry for Eddie tonight. But it's a good question, though. That's a good one on the talent pool. I don't know what you would say about that, Barry, but we've been saying that a long time. If you take Joshua out of the equation at Matchroom, it's not that it's a bad stable or anything, but it's a lot of guys who are trying to establish themselves as superstars, not anyone really there.
Yeah, of course, and it's ticket sellers, isn't it? That's what you need: ticket sellers, and you need TV stars. I think that's so they're always looking for the next one. But again, I think the problem now with especially TV companies, they want that 21-0, 24-0, 35-0. That O is everything, because that paints a picture of this invincibility superstar that we have, where it doesn't need to be that way. But that's how the sport's become now. And Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren as well, they've all played their part in selling that idea, whereas before that wasn't as important. But that's where we are. So it is I don't think it's a massive concern, because one domino falls and there's another one in its place, and that's and Eddie Hearn, who's one of the best talkers in the business, let's be honest, will just build up another fighter. He has Conor Benn there. Look at the Conor Benn star; it's better than any. So that there is a pay-per-view star there, and the Josh Kelly and Ben fight was going to be pay-per-view, like two novices, relatively. I know Kelly would have been European champion, but still, in how many fights they've had, and that would have been a pay-per-view fight, and it would have sold. And it would have done really well on the back of the Ben fight and Eddie Hearn, and they were and Josh Kelly, of course, as well, with his good looks. And now that's gone out the window. But Ben will fight. So they'll run with Nigel Benn now. Nigel Benn, maybe Nigel Benn. They'll run with Conor Benn, and then while they're running with him, there'll be someone else around the corner. Josh Warren will come back and he'll sell leads, and that'll be that hiccup, and it'll be a great comeback story like they did with Anthony Joshua. And so the house, like I said, joking around, but the house never loses, so they'll redesign their idea of how to build a star, and they'll come back, and it'll be the year of the comebacks rather than the year of the undefeated superstars.
Yeah, and what I would say on that as well, if you think about, okay, in Britain maybe he hasn't got all the names anymore, but he's got so much going on, so many fighters in America. He's so busy that I think it gets to a point with these guys where he looks at someone like Josh Kelly and he's like, well, it needs to be sink or swim now. I can't get him to 20-0, 25-0, and then have it's like, right, who's my man here? Like, right, can he be the one? Who can he beat? How can we move him quickly? And when that happens, when you have to do that, that's when you get defeats. I mean, they tried to fight Avanesyan 2.5 years ago. It's mad. So like, I think it was, they wanted to see if he'd sink or swim, basically.
I think another thing, sorry, because I feel like it's my podcast now, nothing to do with you two. But another thing as well, that it depends where Eddie Hearn goes with this DAZN and Sky stuff, because if he stays with Sky, it's all geared around, because it's mainly the UK broadcaster, about UK talent. But if he goes to DAZN, even though there'll be UK subscribers and he has to build that talent, but it's a global broadcaster, so they'll just want the best fights. So it might be easier for him if he goes that way. I don't know. I'm not trying to, not just going to listen to me, but I think his bigger concern that was just building a star. It doesn't matter where he comes from. Geographically, it won't matter as long as he's in one of the regions where the zone is. Maybe I don't know. Or they do like a contender series of their own. There's USA boxing Mexico, because GB don't want to box Mexico ever again. So it'll be that sort of scenario. That I think that'll be where he goes. Will be how he has to, maybe change the way he promotes.
And we shouldn't forget David Avanesyan in all of this. Of course, a fight with of course Conor Benn, Josh Kelly now out of the window, at least for now. And if you're saying, Deck, that Avanesyan sensibly signed up by Matchroom, if Conor Benn comes through against Samuel Vargas in 6 weeks or so, no reason why that fight can't be made. A cracking fight.
It would be great. I'd be surprised if they made it. Even having said that, they're chucking people in to see if they sink or swim, I'd be surprised if they chucked them in. But obviously the beauty of this is that everyone's just watched him now beat Josh Kelly on Sky main event, so they know him. So now it's like people actually, there's a clamour for that. But I still keep going on. There's Chris Congo. There's so many people in Britain that you could fight, and Conor Benn still, like Barry says, is a novice. 20 amateur fights and whatever. He's not ready. If you look in America, obviously they've got the champions. They've got Sean Porter. They've got all those guys knocking about. You've got Virgil Ortiz, who's like the sort of in that position, the same position as Conor Benn is. I feel like there's some learning to do there, and I'm sure Eddie Hearn would agree with that, and Conor obviously does. He always says it. I'd be surprised if he beats Samuel Vargas, they make the Avanesyan fight next, but maybe they did. Maybe it's like, we need a pay-per-view fight. We need a name. We need someone to chuck him in with. I mean, it would be. Can you imagine that? When you talk about action fights, that would be a proper action fight, wouldn't it?
And where do they go with him? That's the thing with Ben. Where will they go? They got Avanesyan there. Obviously, they got him because if that fight was relatively close and he wins, Kelly goes again. Will they want to put Kelly in with him? Will Adam Booth want to put him? I'm not saying he won't put him back in with him, but it won't be immediately. He'll want a couple more fights, I think, or at least one more fight if they fancy going in again, if they fancy it at all. So what do they do with this European champion now? He've signed him up realistically to get him beat. That's how it works. One of your guys who's more marketable, more sellable, you want him to get him. So that's Conor Benn. So you'd think he would have to do that, because once Conor Benn beats Samuel Vargas, where does he go? Because he sees himself as world level, because Vargas is sort of fringe that. So he'll want a title of some sort. He's not ready for world championship level. But to be fair, he's one of the most, if not the most improved fighters in the last sort of 18 months, Conor Benn, to his credit, or 2 years, because a year of it, nothing's happened. But he's massively improved, but he's still way off that level, you would feel. So I think they'd have to chuck him in. Otherwise, you've just signed up a guy for nothing, really.
In the same division, and one man who wants to fight Conor Benn, but probably going to have to wait. Florian Marku looked much better tonight than he did back in December. Stopped Ryland Charlton. Well, again, the title came in the 8th round. Plain sailing for 5 rounds, and then was suddenly dropped. But he just looked far more, should we say, far more composed, picked his shots very well. Certainly, maybe the last outing, just a little bit of a blip.
I think he was more versatile than I gave him credit for. Like, I've seen him a few times, and Marku, I mean, before we'd seen him on Sky, and And he just looked like, 'cause he was just doing what was working for him. He was walking through people. He's not a devastating puncher, but he's heavy-handed. And he hasn't got the fastest hands, but his speed's pretty good. But he's rigid. So he's walking through. So I thought, especially after the Stewart fight, which I thought he won, but even though I thought he won, I still thought he looked really bad and quite, route one. But he moved well against Ryland. I thought against Charlton, he moved really well and using the jab well, and he showed some good adaptability in his game. But he let him off the hook. I think it was the 5th round. He had him all over the place and let him off the hook with all that talking and joking around. And then the 6th round, he was in trouble himself. And you thought, has he made a mistake? Because he was gassing. Because he's all upper body heavy, isn't he? You can see it clearly. And I wonder whether he might be another one with the training where they do all the weights and look fantastic and so superbly strong. But that endurance fitness is not quite there, and that'll be the worry. But to be fair, Charlton is tough and durable, and but he always felt like one big shot was going to cause a bit of a problem, and I think the corner were spot on. They knew their fighter. They gave probably more of an opportunity than they should have, and I think the towel was sort of like second perfect.
Charlton, of course, one of the big beneficiaries last year of basically getting a short notice fight. Lack of opponents came in, upset Joe Laws. Perhaps he looked quite small compared to Marky. Perhaps now come down a division, Deck. Talking about weight again. But
I mean, he was clearly the smaller man, wasn't he? And it's funny because he was one of these people who's clearly good, but would never got an opportunity because he doesn't sell any tickets. And then we happen to be now in this weird era where ticket selling is no longer really a currency for the next however long, or for this 18-month period, whatever it turns out to be. And then these guys get an opportunity, and he obviously beat up Joe Laws, who was a big ticket seller, who was caught cold. And then it was just one of those that was thrown together, and he did look a bit small. I think with Marku, he a former kickboxing world champion, so you're talking like an elite sportsman, and then he comes into boxing and he's sort of back at the bottom level again. I just don't think he was switched on. Like Barry, I saw him at that little place in the O2 on a card. I can't remember, maybe it was an Ultimate Boxer card or something. And he really looked lackluster, and I was expecting a lot because of his background in other combat sports and his following. And then the same thing happened on the Joshua undercard, where he was just lackluster. It was like he wasn't switched on. Then he gets someone who people are picking against him, and finally there's a bit of needle, and he just switches on, and he's got that, he's clearly got some ability there, power, and very strong. I think he just totally lost concentration and got clipped, but then he still managed to, get it back. At that point, I was a little bit worried, but I think Charlton had just had too much damage, and I feel like maybe he's a bit small for that division. It's fun. I think Marku's going to be fun though, because especially when the crowd's back. Who's to set up? What is he now? 7-0 or something like that? 8-0.
Yeah.
Again, that division is packed. Yeah, that division's packed. He's a great addition. I think Charlton, if he can get down one, if he could do 10 stone, which is clearly his best weight, then it's great for him. He lost tonight, but the courage and the bravery, people seem to like him as well. And he's done the business. He's signed up, isn't he?
And he works in a care home as well. Ticking all the boxes. Yeah,
is he a chef in a care home? Yeah.
He is indeed, yeah. Listen, Marku's not going to fight Conor Benn next. We kind of know that, but it's not a fight that we should dismiss completely from the future. Any interest?
Well, I think I think Ben. I think he's way past that now. That's the thing with if it's on Mark. I think he's way past that, and they won't generate the money for that. That's the thing. I think Marku's got to fight. Ryland Charlton was for their level similar was a good test for him, especially with the Joe Laws. But he's got to beat someone of British title contention, I think, to get anywhere near Conor Benn. I really think that there's enough for Chris Congos, Clay, something like that. Luther Clay would be a good win for him. But again, I still think you don't put Luther Clay with Conor Benn. I'm not saying they're massively different in abilities, but Conor Benn's such a big name now that he doesn't need to box Marku. Unless Marku gets he got a big following, Albanian following apparently on social media, so I've heard. So, but if he gets a decent domestic marquee name at best, then they can sell the fight. But apart from that, Conor Benn's looking for, he beat a guy around European level, and and he might be fighting for the European title next. Who knows? After Vargas, of course.
Just touch on, well, certainly one other fight. Robbie Davies Jr. beaten on points by Gabriel Valenzuela. I think, well, the interesting thing for me in this fight was the sort of interaction in the corner. So he fought southpaw. I can't remember if it was the third round or after the third round, but he had this conversation with Dominic Ingle where he was whispering in his ear. The Sky cameras, they almost caught it, but couldn't quite make it out. But it seemed like he just wasn't comfortable. He wasn't happy. And I'm not sure Dominic Ingle actually ever heard him properly say what he wanted to say. But then later on, he said, I don't want to keep fighting southpaw. And Dominic Ingle said, no, stick to it. So first of all, Barry, should he have been fighting southpaw? And secondly, what do you do when you feel like something's wrong? You want to change it, but your corner's saying no.
Well, Dominic Ingle's a good, obviously really experienced, and he's a good cornerman. And, you're going to go back to how good he was. Forget about the other champions. How good he was with Billy Joe Saunders against David Lemieux. Oh, he kept Billy really calm. But your corner is, if you haven't got trust in your cornerman, then you're with the wrong guy. If that's the case. That you have to try. And it's not so you can't have an interaction, but but if the fighter doesn't want to do something, really doesn't want to do it, then you shouldn't force him to do that either, even if you think that's the right thing. That's the worry. And he was getting caught with right hands so easy. And being a southpaw, when you go southpaw, obviously if the guy who's orthodox gets his foot on the outside, then that right hand's a punch that's going to be the easiest one to be caught with. So, and he was. So that was maybe an issue there. And also, when you're not comfortable doing that way, then you're not happy with yourself. You're not confident with your work. So that means everything's a little bit more laboured, and you're snatching at your shots. It affects you. So you have to be comfortable. So there's a real problem there. But I don't think that was the reason why he got beat. The reason he got beat was he doesn't move his head. He just doesn't move his head. And also, I noticed and I have noticed it before with Robbie Davies, that he was walking forward heel toe, which is terrible for your balance. Because if you get caught on your heel, you get knocked back, and you've seen him a few times get knocked back. You've got to be on the balls of your feet all the time, or flat-footed at best. You don't go on your heels. Why would you want to do that? Your balance is awful.
Is that something you've noticed in previous fights, or just tonight?
I haven't, but I haven't looked for it. But I haven't noticed it. I just at that time he was coming forward. He was stepping that front foot was on the heel first, and that's something that you from the amateurs should be really pushed out to you straight away, and it wasn't, because you need to be on the balls of your feet. Because you can slide in quick. Also, you're engaged in your muscles, because you're crouching down a bit, so you can jump out the distance. You can pivot, and you can go down and generate power to get your shots. You need to be like that, and also your balance will be a lot better. So everything about that, going with your heel toe, is totally wrong. But his head movement, the reason he got beat, ultimately, he took too many shots because his head doesn't move after he throws the punch. And that was a massive thing. With that hair as well, his head looks huge. So it's a massive target as it is. You haven't got a pea head like I have, but you've got to keep, every time you throw a punch, you should move your head all the time. And that's very important. And I think that's the biggest lesson that you should have learned from tonight.
Thankfully, we did at least avoid another scorecard controversy. I think everybody was in agreement that, 1 or 2 rounds, but you still, you almost wonder if the judges are going to.
They even saying it on the commentary, like, just nobody knows anymore. It's mad.
The thing is, he's only been. Sorry.
No, go on. No, please.
No. I was just going to say he's only been with Dominic Ingle. I think this was their first fight together, and of course, the Ingle gym, there is this renowned style, but it's not for everyone, right? Surely, especially if you're coming to it later in your career, it must be difficult to try and adapt.
It must, but I don't think there is. I think they're more orthodox than they have been for a very long time. I don't think Dom's the same as Brendan. I think
look at Kell Brook. Kell Brook has his hands up.
Exactly. They're all like Nasri and Harold Graham and even Johnny. I think they were the last ones who were really loose and hands by their ankles and stuff. But that switch hitting was something that they always, because they got that circle in the gym that they use. That switch hitting is always something that sets them apart. But either way, you have to that's down to the fighter. You have to. It's hard to leave a trainer, of course, but you have to be comfortable with him. You have to trust him, or don't trust him. If you don't trust him, it doesn't mean he's a bad trainer. It just means he's not suited for you. But you have to find someone who is. So being a great trainer is great, which Dom clearly is a fantastic trainer, but not for everyone. That's the truth. He's just not for everyone. You have to find, having a rapport is almost important as the knowledge, almost as important as the knowledge. And also, a good trainer doesn't necessarily make a good cornerman. They are not always exclusively a partnership. So some people are great in the gym and useless in the corner, and Dom's good in both. So I just think maybe they're not a right fit. If they're arguing in the corner, one's not comfortable doing stuff, the other one's trying to force him to do it because he thinks it's right. That's maybe they're not the right fit. I guess I could have said that really quickly, couldn't I? They're not. I don't think they're the right fit. Why say something in 2 words when you can say it in 25?
Absolutely. I think we mentioned earlier about learning from a defeat, and Jordan Gill, who does have a defeat to his name, albeit he was ill beforehand, but doesn't necessarily use that as an excuse, but has rebuilt well and looked good tonight. To be fair, obviously the heavyweight fight debut, so we can sort of put that to one side. But the other 4, all very close fights, all very good fights, and a good performance from Jordan.
I thought he was really good. He was. He had a couple of sticky moments, didn't he? I think it was the end of the 5th where he started well, and then that Juarez is a good opponent. And Jordan had COVID as well, so I'm pretty sure it knocked him for 6 as well. Some people get it and it doesn't matter, but I think it was affected by it. So it was interesting to see. It's interesting to see how all athletes respond to, particularly boxers. But a couple of sticky moments. I thought he boxed really well, particularly, and I was really impressed with Dave Caldwell's, because obviously you can hear everything now. Like throughout the round, everything he's saying, and Jordan's literally doing exactly what he tells him. And I was really impressed by that whole dynamic, in total contrast to what we've just spoken about with Robbie Davis Jr. Like it was the total opposite. Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's lost. I believe that was probably a harder fight, and he had far more pressure in that fight than he did even in the one that he lost in terms of heavy pressure from Juarez. Yeah, really, really impressed by him.
I think for me, he's in a I said this before and I'll say it again, in a generation of everyone trying to overcomplicate stuff. I mean, everyone from pundits to trainers to boxers trying to make this sport of ours so scientific that, you have to be some sort of professor to be able to do it. And it's a very simple sport, really. And Jordan Gill is an example of that. He had in the fight camp, won the fight on the jab and using his legs. And again, tonight, he does the basics very, very well. Only the basics. He barely does more than that. But he looks so impressive in doing it. And he's not the biggest puncher. So he's always going to have problems in fights where people are going to walk into him. And he's always going to have little... But that you are what you are. But what he does is keep his shape and uses that jab really well. And as soon as that back rope hits his leg, he pivots and gets back in the center of the ring. And they're things that you learn from an early age, but you forget because you do all the other complicated stuff that looks flash and great. And it looks great when it works, but you get knocked out when it doesn't. And he keeps his shape and does everything right and correct. So he does the basics, and quite often, and especially in the fight camp and even tonight, was one of the best performances because of that.
And one of boxing's great hairstyles now. He's just gone with this COVID look and just run with it.
I've been calling him Wilfredo Gilmez. But no one's taken to it, and I'm gutted. I keep writing it down.
That's why we signed him. That's why we signed him.
Just one very final note, which you should mention Johnny Fisher, since he was the only other fight. Looks like another heavyweight, sort of accelerated, having not had a huge amateur career, but looked, for all the time he was in the ring, looked reasonably clever.
Yeah, I think with heavyweights, you can fit promoting a boxer in any other weight than a heavyweight is almost like a different sport. So you can feed a heavyweight a load of people you can pass over. And I think they should do that. But it's because a lack of amateur experience. I would do that. I would just feed him a load of people, make him look good, build his confidence whilst he's learning in the gym. Because the problem with the heavyweight, you put them in a decent test too early, they get knocked out. They don't get beat. Or they don't get stopped. They get knocked out and hurt. So I think it's about taking your time. He looked really good, to be fair. And when he had the guy hurt, he really went for it. So all that's good, and it makes him exciting. But it's so early days. So and again, Eddie won't care who he's fighting or how rubbish the guy is. It'll be about just getting him. You see this kid blasting people out, and that because all you don't remember all the other stuff. Just in heavyweight boxing in general, you forget about the 9 rounds of holding on and kissing and hugging. You just remember the big right hand that knocked the guy out, and then you rave about it. So I think they'll build him slowly, and then we won't see what he's made of for another 18 months to 2 years minimum. So, but it'll be entertaining to watch him. I think he's going to be a kid who you can just see that maybe he has that in his makeup. That once he hits you, he's going to forget everything he's learned and just want to rip your head off. And for us, for the trainer, it's a nightmare, but for us, it's exciting.
For sure. Well, another good night of boxing in the books. Of course, next weekend we should have had Carl Frampton against Jamel Herring. We don't, but we do have Canelo Alvarez against Anvi Yildirim. That one, of course, 5 a.m. We're not going to ask Barry or Declan to come on just after that, but we will be back around probably 10 a.m. on Sunday to have a look back at that one. Again, of course, questions always welcome. Thank you to Barry. I mean, as flawless a debut as you would expect. Declan, always reliable.
Are we going to do both? Are we taking this show on the road to go to Gibraltar? By the way, we packing our bags and getting out there.
If you're paying,
that's a bit of a curveball, that one, but you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, of course, Dillian White should be 2 weeks' time, but no. I mean, to be fair, it's the first fight for a long time I can remember that has a name. Was it Rock? No, hang on.
Rumble on the Rock, something like that.
That's the one. Yeah, I thought they'd done away with the one.
On the Rock. And it's an intriguing one, isn't it?
Yeah,
an intriguing one.
Very much so. Potentially the same night as Frampton's rescheduled one, unfortunately, but we'll see if they can sort that out. March 27th, Dillian White, Alexander Povetkin. So, as I said, thank you guys. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye.